All right, so now it is really my honor to introduce Carol Sowl, who has been on the island and teaching in the one-room classroom that is now being expanded, so we couldn't be in that space, but I'm happy to have you here instead. So, Carol Sowl, thank you for being here, and she used to teach the most comfortable places in a rocking chair, so hence the rocking chair.
So I thank Laurel for accommodating my get back in the rocking chair. So I first came to Madeline Island in 1974 and had no affiliation with the school at that particular time, but was going to school and ended up leaving an original major and majoring in special ed and in regular education. And my first teaching job was in Cable, Wisconsin, and I taught in Cable and Drummond and Grandview. And I had to drive between all three schools every single day. So I spent more time on the road than I spent with students. And after 3 years of that, and then the other part of special ed, if any of you have any experience with that, was the massive amounts of paperwork that you had to do. So between driving and the paperwork, I really didn't get a whole lot of one-on-one time with my students, which was discouraging. So after 3 years, I left and I moved up to Madeline Island. So my first experience with the school was, we were actually part of the Ashland School District at that time. Some of you may remember those times. And the Ashland School District contracted for me to work with a student that had special needs in the LaPointe School. And the space that they gave us to work on is what was then known as the dungeon. And they actually put a little desk down there with a chair for me right next to the boiler. So that was our special ed room, and if any of you have had any experience with special ed, you know that's not unusual. In my first job, we had all of the toilet pipes running through the building, which was also in the basement. So I was kind of used to that environment. So I did that for one school year, and then I was also called upon to sub quite a bit. So the students that I worked with them are now in their 50s, and some of them are grandparents. So when I decided to retire, it was before that third generation came along. So the island families to me were the most important part of teaching here on the island. And the other part, which I will kind of elaborate on a little bit, was the volunteers. And I could not have done the job that I did in the school without the community participating. And that was, so part of my job was being the facilitator of having people come in and looking to see, what their strengths were, how they could contribute, so that the children that went to school at the LaPointe School really felt like they were part of a community school. So another part of my participation in the school district was because we were part of the Ashland School District, our kids that went to Bayfield were being educated, but there was no way to approach the school board in Bayfield about our needs because we were part of the Ashland School District. So I was one of 4 island parents that flew to Madison, and I'm thinking it was 1986, but I might have been 87. But we flew to Madison and we petitioned the Department of Public Instruction with an attorney to become part of the Bayfield School District, and we were successful in that venture. So that was something that really made a huge difference in just having representation on the school board, having people that were a little closer nearby. People never came from Ashland to check in on the island school as far as I knew. when I first started as the full-time teacher there, our library was full of books that were stamped, withdrawn, and discarded by the Ashland public school system. So that was what our library looked like at the time. So jump ahead to the and then my children, who were born in 1982 and 1985, became students at the LaPointe School, and I had no desire to be the teacher for my own kids. I knew people that did that, and sometimes it was successful and sometimes it was a nightmare, and knowing especially my youngest as I knew her, I knew that it would be a nightmare. So I had another business, and I did that until I sold my business in 1997, and at that same time there was an opening for the LaPointe School teacher. And so in 1998, I became the teacher, one of the teachers at the LaPointe School. I often taught with a partner teacher, but not always. So depending on what our student enrollment was, I had a partner teacher to start with, and we decided that we were going to teach our subject areas. So I was stronger in math and science, and I wanted to do that, so we did that. And she did reading and language arts and social studies, and that worked out okay, but again, we were teaching K-6 at that time. So it was the huge spread, and still trying to juggle all of those grades at once and teach those subject areas was a challenge. So teaching at the LaPointe School for me was a learning experience the whole time, because my dynamics changed every year. Sometimes I had a lot of kindergartners and first graders. Sometimes I had a lot of older kids. So it was always juggling. I wasn't always the fourth grade teacher who got to teach the same curriculum year after year, and I wasn't like, okay, fifth grade, here comes another group of fifth graders, I'm teaching American history again. It was, all right, so how do I meet the needs of the fifth graders who, according to Wisconsin state standards, are supposed to be learning history at this point? So it was a lot of juggling, and it was a lot of, kind of trial and error to start with, to figure out how I could make it all work. So before I got the teaching job, though, I was going in and I was volunteering because the teacher that was here was the lone teacher. And again, with that K5, K6 split, or the K6 spread, to be able to meet all the needs of the students was very difficult. So I had sold my business. I went in and I taught second grade reading every day. And I also inherited the teaching the fourth and fifth graders and one sixth grader social studies. So in the course of teaching the fourth and fifth and sixth graders social studies, we decided that to really learn about Wisconsin history, there would be nothing better than to actually go discover Wisconsin. So that was the beginning of the first of many Wisconsin trips. And the kids did a lot of the research on where they wanted to go. We had maps out, they wrote letters. This was before the internet, so we didn't have, we couldn't go online and find all these places. So they were writing letters. They were getting brochures back in the mail. We did a lot of research, and they decided where they were gonna go. My one absolute for every single one of the Wisconsin trips we took afterwards was that we had to go to the state capitol. So we contacted our legislator at the time, who was Barb Linton, and she said, come on down, I'll give you the big tour. But we started out by going to Green Bay. We went to the Green Bay Packer Hall of Fame, which made Bertie very happy because she was one of our chaperones, and Lacey was also one of our chaperones. and I guess I won't tell the Ann Lacey story this time, but if you want to meet me over at the refreshment table, I'll tell you about. So we went to Green Bay, we traveled around, we stayed in hotels. The kids had to have a budget, they had to know how much money we were spending, they kept track of how many miles we were going, they found out how many miles to the gallon we were getting in our cars, and they did all sorts of calculations. So in that way, we were meeting all of the criteria for all of the standards we were supposed to be meeting, but we were having a blast. We were pitching tents in the pouring rain, weren't we, Anne?
Yeah.
With the kids in the car to try to keep them warm, but we were in the Drummond glacial.
The lake, the glacial lake.
Over in eastern Wisconsin, and it was pouring rain. Another campground we were in, it was so foggy we couldn't see the outhouse from our tents, and we were sitting right next to it. So it was an adventure. It was a great adventure, and we all had a blast. And by the time we left on a Sunday and came home on that Friday afternoon, and by the time we got back, we were exhausted. But again, it just cemented in my mind that, you know, there can be a lot of learning going on outside of the classroom, and you can fit all of those things in that you're supposed to be doing with a little creativity. So that started our first Wisconsin trip, and I believe that I went on 10, and there was one that I didn't go on. It was actually the second one I didn't go on, and then I believe Kate and Evan have taken the kids on one shorter one since then.
Yeah, they're not camping.
Not camping though. No, we gave up camping early in our, I believe it was our third Wisconsin trip. We were camping, we had all the tents and everything, and there was a tornado warning in southern Wisconsin. So we ended up checking into a hotel and said, no, we're not bringing all of this gear and trying to camp. But our funding had changed at that time. So our first Wisconsin trip, we had bake sales, we had a breakfast, we had a car wash, we did whatever we could do to raise enough money to go. The Bayfield School District did not participate in any way as far as financially helping us out for the first one. And so it was, the kids were involved in all of that fundraising as well, you know, and that determined where we were going. So again, it was a great lesson in economics for them, and, you know, what they were able to do. After the first trip, or maybe the second trip, Evan Erickson Sr. decided that he was going to row around Madeline Island, and he was going to collect money, sponsorship for rowing around Madeline Island, and that money was going to go towards the Wisconsin trip.
Oh, nice.
A couple years after that, he rowed to Duluth and back. Or he rowed to Duluth, he didn't row back again, I don't believe, but you'd have to ask Evan. But again, so we ended up with about $12,000 in a LaPointe Center fund that is specifically for kids being able to go on the Wisconsin trip. So that took that whole fundraising part out of it. I got a little more aggressive and assertive with the Bayfield School District once I had a teaching position, and asked them for a vehicle to transport us, and also for some money to help cover some of the expense of the trip. So back to the challenges of multi-grade teaching. So again, at that time I had a partner teacher, and then after that the enrollment went down. So my enrollment went from, I had 23 kids at the most one year, and we had 2 full-time teachers at that point. A few years later, after, you know, kids moved through, my lowest enrollment was 8 students, and then it was just myself and an aide at that point. So, and then every so often, depending on how many kids, there was a halftime teacher. And it's still changing like that. I believe last year there was a full-time teacher and a halftime aide, or was Michaela full-time? I don't remember.
Oh, she was halftime for that.
She was she was halftime. So the school district, changes every year depending on the enrollment of how many teachers. So I was learning, I was figuring out things. I had decided that for science and social studies, instead of trying, especially for the older grades, because people were becoming more adamant that these Wisconsin teacher standards were adhered to in a better way, that I was going to teach in a rotation. So for example, in third grade, third graders are supposed to learn all about their community. In fourth grade, they learn about their state. In fifth grade, they learn about the history and the geography of the United States, the whole country. So I decided that instead of trying to cover all three of those things in one school year, while also teaching kindergarten, first, second grade social studies, that I was just going to I was going to do one, because all of my students were with me for 6 to 7 years. So I knew that, in third grade, they might not be studying about their community, but they might be studying about their community when they were in fifth grade. And that was way more manageable for me to be able to take the content and make it apply to fifth graders and third graders with the same subject matter. So at that point, I was also considering my professional development opportunities, and I had done a lot with workshops and technology. I became a national board certified teacher, which is a lot of self-reflection on how you're teaching. Videotaping yourself, videotaping your students, looking to see how you're following standards. So that gave me a lot of time to kind of think about what was working and what wasn't working. So at that point, I was either looking at getting a master's in environmental ed or in technology. And Anne and I went to the Audubon Center of the Northwoods in Sandstone, Minnesota, and took some weekend classes because we had to get continuing ed credits anyway. And we got to go down there and we got to go canoeing. Or we got to go tromping around in the woods, or we got to go on these big geology trips. And Clayton was on the technology side of my professional development. I took a class in Duluth, and it was on how to use technology to help meet special ed standards. So, sorry, Clayton, but the environmental ed was way more fun. So as going through these classes and everything, and always at the back of my mind thinking, how do I better meet these standards? Because at the same time, the state of Wisconsin was making us every single year write down how we were meeting standards. So and they kept changing, and we'd rewrite them, and then they'd change, and we'd rewrite them again, and so it was just something that I needed a way to wrap my head around. Am I meeting all of these standards that these kids are supposed to? Are they learning how to write? Are they learning the math that they need to learn? Are they becoming literate? Are they learning the social studies and science that they need to be able to do? So for my master's, I decided that I was going to design a template, and it was going to be based on place-based education. And place-based education is where you take the community that you're in and the context with which you teach, and you use that context, those people, that environment, all of the things that your community has to offer to meet the standards that you need to meet for your students. And because I had to write a master's thesis anyway, it was the perfect vehicle for figuring this all out. And there were a couple of people that were kind of the national experts in that. David Sowl was in New Hampshire, at the University of New Hampshire, doing a lot of work with that. And so he was kind of my guide. And then there were two other men, and I can't remember their names, but they had put together kind of a process that you went through to evaluate your community and see what's there. Well, I couldn't have picked a better place to teach, because Madeline Island has it all as far as resources go. We had the Madeline Island Museum was right next door. And my students learned how to go in the back door and go down into the basement and ask the person. Sherry Peterson was actually working there at the time, and she was more than happy to spend hours with my kids, helping them figure out the answer to their questions. We have this incredible environment where we've got water, we've got woods, we've got history, we've got, Native American culture, we've got the fur traders, everything was here. We have an incredible group of artists who live on the island who were more than willing to help. And I'm gonna give some pretty specific examples of how we used all that. But I was just kind of blown away as I was pulling in all of these resources to see what was there that I could use. So I ended up writing and designing a template so that with my ever-changing curriculum needs and the needs of my students, I could kind of plug in what they needed to be able to do. Because the Wisconsin state standards are very specific in saying, by the end of 3rd grade, you shall be able to blah, 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 blah. And I had to make sure that my kids were getting that. So I had all of those standards kind of, in my computer, and I would look and see, okay, what do I need to teach? What do my kids need to be able to do by the end of this time period? And then I would look around the community and think, okay, again, with my revolving social studies and science curriculums, I could meet a lot of those standards by bringing math and writing and reading and research into all of those things. So I'm gonna give you some very specific examples about what we did. So citizen science projects are out there. Cornell Lab of Ornithology has a very nice curriculum for classroom teachers on studying birds. So that was one of the things that we did. So because I'm teaching 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, first in kindergarten, they were kind of in the periphery, they were there. So I had some options for my students, and they would include the things that they needed to use. So for our bird unit, students were either able to create a brochure where they had to design a pollinator and a bird-friendly environment for our backyard. Or they could learn about how to feed birds, and then design bird houses. We had fathers who were carpenters came in and helped kids build their designed bird houses. The younger kids, so the kindergartners and 1st graders, were very good at identifying birds because of this curriculum that the Cornell ornithology lab puts out there. I mean, they have coloring pages, they have, color coded, what do you look at when you see a bird? You look at their beak, you look at their feathers, you look at what they're eating. And so everybody was involved in all of this. And at the same time, they were writing, they were reading, they were doing research. So my Evan Erickson story. So Evan was one of my students at the time. I think he was in the 3rd grade then. And we had bird feeders sitting right outside the classroom window so that the birds would come in and the kids would sit there with binoculars and try to figure out what they were. So Evan decided that he was going to go out every recess time, and we had this big straw hat, and he poured sunflower seeds in the rim of the hat, and he would go out there and he would sit in this orange chair every day, and he would not move a muscle. And the chickadees were coming in to the bird feeders, and he would sit there, and you could see his eyes kind of going back and forth, but he wouldn't move. And by the end of the week, he had 3 or 4 chickadees eating off of the hat so I wish he was here. So that,
Yes.
But, so the kids really got into it. That's when we first started a little garden back there, and some of the students decided that they were gonna create a pollinator garden, so they researched what kinds of wildflowers we had, what would bring them in. We planted grapevines there, we planted currant bushes there, but it was all based on their research. I did not tell them what they should put there. We used a lot of citizen science sites. Another citizen science site we used was Journey North, where one fall we planted, they told you what kind of tulips. I think they were giant red emperor tulips, and we planted 100 of them in the garden. And then we put up a map of the United States, and by this time we had computers, so we were online at that point, and you could go to the Journey North site, and you could see from the southern part of the country as the tulips were blooming, and how it would come north, and my students were documenting, what point, we've got green, and so we would send in our data, and we've got leaves, and we'd send in the data, and they finally bloomed. We did the same thing with hummingbird migration on the Journey North site, where they could see them leaving Mexico, they could see them in the southern United States, they could see them in Illinois. And again, we're learning US geography because we're putting that all on the map, and those kids knew where those states were. I didn't have to give them flashcards, and we weren't doing learning just because they had to memorize something. They were learning it because they wanted to know where those places were, and they were seeing it every day in the map. Another year we used the lake a ton, even though the logistics of getting kids out on the lake was a little difficult, but we had some sailors in the community who I was able to badger into taking kids out on sailboats. So we went out on sailboats. We did macroinvertebrate testing both in the lagoon, in my pond, and in the poor man's marina. We built macroinvertebrate cages and sunk them, and then we could compare the water quality and how the oxygen levels. They were doing that. We were outside a lot. We really did not spend a whole lot, we spent as little time in the classroom as we could get away with spending in the classroom. So, and again, all of that is supported with a lot of citizen science project information that is designed for classrooms online. And so, again, they were submitting data that became part of a nationwide citizen science thing. So it was real, you know, it was very authentic learning, and the kids loved it, and I did too. Let's see, lots of resources out there from Sea Grant, Project Wet Wild Learning Tree. There was a plethora. The Great Lakes Aquarium had put together a huge trunk on Lake Superior where you could just get this huge trunk of materials, and that's where we got a lot of our macroinvertebrate stuff. But it also, you know, talked about shipwrecks, it talked about, there was just so much, and kids were able to choose what they wanted to learn about. So it really helped as far as the, you know, hitting the age level gaps, because it was designed for K through 6. So those materials were there. We didn't use very many textbooks. We used a math book. We never used science books. We hardly ever used the social studies books. Of course, all those textbooks that I had were so old that it wasn't really worth opening them up anyway. We did use, you know, for teaching kids how to read, we did use reading books, but again, they were motivated by wanting to find out the answers to some of the questions from some of the research that we did. So another example was we had an art teacher that came over once a week and delivered art to, he'd do a K3 and then he'd do a 4 through 6 or 4 through 5 art lesson, and then he decided he was going to retire. Well, the Bayfield School District did not, he was also their Title I teacher, not the art teacher, and they decided that they didn't have anybody else to send over for art, so I was kind of on my own as an art teacher. And again, I looked out at our community and I said, all right, we've got weavers, we've got potters, we've got painters, we've just got this plethora of resources as far as, you know, who could teach art. So I wrote a grant and was awarded some grant money. I told the Bayfield School District that I needed an art budget because they had been paying somebody before, and I needed materials. And I ended up writing a grant to the LaPointe Center and invited area artists to come in, and, you know, they could sign up for 2 weeks, they could sign up for one session, they could sign up for as many, you know, as they wanted to. And the response was overwhelming. It was, I mean, there were people just coming out of the woodwork saying, oh, I would love to do this with the kids, and can you fit me in? And I mean, it got to the point where one year I had to schedule people for the next September because I had so many people and we ran out of time. So I'm going to tell you about a couple of those projects. My favorite, I think, was what I call the Sheep to Shawl project. And at the time, Cindy Dalzell had her sheep out at the farm, and her daughter was gone by then, not, I mean, in my classroom anymore. But we decided that we wanted to go out there, and then Mitchie got in the conversation, and Eloise got in the conversation, and we decided, and then at the same time, so Sherry was my partner teacher, Sherry Milburn was my partner teacher at the time, and we were also doing a puppet project with Julie Stryker North to talk about the women of the American Revolution. So we were doing that for our social studies project. So we decided that we were going to go out to Cindy's farm. The kids were going to be involved in the actual shearing of the sheep. They gathered the dirty, filthy, rotten wool from the floors of the barn. We brought it back to the school. We washed it, we carded it. Eloise came in and taught us how to spin it using CD-ROM discs and pencils. We spun the yarn. Eloise also helped kids learn how to knit the yarn. Mitchie took kids and had them weave fabric. And then we made costumes for our puppets
Wow.
out of yarn that we, and most of them were shawls. I mean, it wasn't like, this was very rough spun and knitted yarn, but we made shawls for the women of the American Revolution puppet show. And it was just fabulous. I mean, all of the people, and we dyed the yarn. So all of the people that were just, it was one of those projects that just kind of took off on its own. So, I am not asking for credit for all of this but I was the facilitator of all of these people who wanted to do all of this stuff and, bring it all together. My other favorite project, and I have to thank the Coffins for this as well, because when I had my rental business, one of the biggest questions that came across my desk was, where's the Hidden Village? And I would never tell anybody where the Hidden Village was, even though I knew, because I was taken there when I first came to Madeline Island. But, and one of our grandpas was Tim Sullivan. And so Tim and I were talking one day, and because I knew that people were still asking that question, I said, Tim, what would you think about making our own little hidden village? And in the meantime, we had made the Capture Trail because I happened to know the town foreman or the town chairman. We had made it more accessible. I had a student who was not always able to get down the trail the way it originally was because there were roots coming up all over the place and it just was not wheelchair friendly. We couldn't get there, and so with the help of the Wilderness Preserve and the town of La Pointe, that trail was graveled and smoothed out, and so we built a learning circle halfway down the Capture Trail. And Tim, I understand, came out and talked to someone in your family about how those were made and got some good advice on what not to do and what to do. And so Tim came as one of our art fellows. And the first year we built 3 amazing little structures. And then we took them with the help of the town foreman or the town chairman or whatever he was at the time down, and we planted them in the middle of the woods behind our learning center. I don't know if any of you have not gone out to those woods to see them. You have to go see what has happened out there. So then Tim came back 2 years later because he had 2 more grandchildren that were part of that group, and we made 3 more. Well, since then, people have been making their own, and there is quite a community on both sides of the Capture Trail now. There are buildings all over the woods out there, which are just amazing. And now when people ask, where's the Hidden Village? We tell them it's off the Capture Trail. And so that was, again, another one of those great projects that could never have happened without this community.
And I think it took the pressure off ours.
Oh, yeah.
So
And
thank you.
You're very welcome. No, it was, because you used to be able to see where people got off the side of the road because
Yes.
all of the cars parked there.
Yeah.
But, and so now, they go into the Chamber of Commerce and people say, where's the Hidden Village? And they say it's on the Capture Trail. And so people they don't know that wasn't the original one, but anyway, so those were just 2 examples of the kind of art projects. I mean, sometimes it was just painting, sometimes Sarah Schramm came in and did art history, so like we had Modigliani's up on the wall because kids learned who these artists were. It was just incredible, the input that we had there at the school. Other volunteers were, again, so I talked about how the museum was part of, and Sherry Peterson was a big part of being able to go in that back door. So one year I posed the question to the kids. We took a walk around town and I said, all right, here's Colonel Woods Avenue. Here's LeSueur Street. Here's Rice Street. Why are these roads named what they're named? And so the kids all guessed, they all had ideas of where these road names came from, but they had no idea. LeSueur, one of my students said, well, I know that there's LeSueur canned peas. Maybe it's from that. And then somebody else said something about popcorn for Colonel Woods. So anyway, I said, all right, so we're gonna do a little research, and kids kind of divided up their names, and I was able to send them. I talked to Sherry and I said, all right, so this is what we're doing. What can are you willing to help with this? So I would send over a group of kids. They'd cross the road, they'd go in the back door, they'd go down into the basement, and Sherry would bring out these, artifacts that aren't upstairs, but there's lots and lots of information in the basement of the museum. And Sherry would sit there, and the kids would would do the research and figure out where these names came from. So they knew who Colonel Woods was. So that was really fun. Again, it was just the resource. Another time we went over to the town hall and made Waggy pull out all of the plat maps and that were in the vault. And so, we're looking through these old plats of LaPointe from when it first started and could see the road names, and that was it, but it was right there. It wasn't something that, we were looking in a social studies book for. So who needs social studies books? I also had people that were invaluable to me in coming into the classroom and saying, I was a math teacher, or I'm good at math, what can I do? And so I can't thank enough all of the people who volunteered, because there was no way that I was going to be able to meet with 6 different grade levels every single day and teach and support what I needed to support by myself. So I had many volunteers come in. Tom Venom came in and talked to the kids about what he did at the Smithsonian as the ethnomusicologist. Mort Cushman came in and started reading to the kids every Friday, which was just a delight for both Mort and the kids, and seeing them all together and interacting was amazing. And then when Mort wasn't able to do it, Ludlow Jr. came in, and he's still reading to the kids every Friday.
Wow.
So it's just, and especially getting that male influence into the classroom for kids at that age was so very important. That, and then the kids would go out in the community and they knew all these people, and the people of the community knew what was happening in the school. And it just, it was such an incredible experience. It was a lot of work. I will not sugarcoat that. It was a lot of work, but I am so grateful that I was able to be and teach where I taught for 20 years. It was amazing. The challenges was doing it all. For the most part, sometimes we had somebody that made lunch, sometimes we didn't. Sometimes we had somebody that did the dishes, sometimes we didn't. I've been known to teach a reading lesson while I was also plunging the toilet. I had a student come out of the bathroom one day and say that there was a bat in the toilet. Connie Ross came upstairs one day from the basement and said there was a duck in the basement. And I was the one that took care of all of that stuff. I did not have a janitor. I did not have a maintenance crew other than what the Bayfield School District would decide. Occasionally they would send someone over. We were, replacing, and it got better after I left because I kind of made a big stink about it. So they do have a maintenance person now, and they, got better help for their lunches and everything, but some of the greatest things for me about the experience was I got to spend 6 or 7 years with those same kids, and they're like mine.
Yeah, of course.
I still get hugs from them all the time, which I love. The families, I've lived in this community since I was 19 years old, so I've known all of the families, but just having that extra level for the most part. There were a couple of times where it got a little hairy, but and the fact that I could teach rooted in this community was incredible. That's all I have to say.
Oh, wonderful.